So I'm Orit, and for most of the previous decade, probably like a few others in this room, I tried to solve the Middle East conflict. What I'd like to share with you today are some of the ideas I developed following my many failures and disappointments. So I was working on issues like cooperation and mandates for international missions, and was fortunate to be able to closely follow the workings of diplomats, governments, NGOs, and military experts as they try to build peace. I met brilliant, highly motivated, and uniquely resourced decision makers who really could explain all the complex intricacies of this tragic conflict. And yet, their accumulated efforts have hardly made a dent. In fact, as we know, the conflict only continued to deteriorate into ever-worsening states. Complexity, of course, is behind this difficulty. We know and further learn today why you can't take a conflict and simply reduce it into a list of core individual problems for elites to negotiate. Why supporters and spoilers are not a fixed given, but actually they evolve over time, they shift positions, they shift identities. And of course, while the whole notion of an end state is in fact an oxymoron. Now, this is all because at its essence, the landscape within which conflict plays out is just a vast network of people. It isn't managed by hierarchies or leaders, but is actually shaped by millions of individuals interacting politically, economically, socially. At each point, they make local decisions based on their own personal experience and immediate context. That could be a sense of a threat, a sudden opportunity, or just the needs and ideas of the people around them. All these almost mundane daily actions by so many people across this vast network accumulate to create what we recognize as reality. A state of peace, like a state of war, is really an ecological state. It cannot be designed at will. It can only be nourished. And of course, as we heard, this is not only true of conflicts, but of many other social problems, whether it's obesity or poverty or urban regeneration, or just trying to revive social mobility. Across the world, thousands of well-meaning individuals work daily to transform social ecologies. And what is really lacking is a better toolbox. Now, of course, advanced research does provide a very important part of the answer. Stephen Hawking did suggest that the 21st century will be the century of complexity. But if we really want to change the world, we need to learn not only how to better explain complexity, but also how to better do complexity. Now, luckily, human reality has always been complex. So some wise people have already given us some heads up in this direction, even if they did live some millennia ago. And as it turns out, ancient Chinese thinkers approached human reality and change through conceptual frameworks that are surprisingly similar to complexity theories of today. Most crucially, though, they tended to focus on the operational side, developing tools and strategies for operating within complex environments. The most elaborate of these can be found in traditional Chinese medicine, and specifically in the art of acupuncture. Now, very generally speaking, this approach analyzes dynamic flows rather than specific conditions. It then designs sets of low-intensity interventions whose sole aim is to strengthen or disrupt these very patterns. The interventions themselves, in this case very thin needles, do not insert new resources into the environment. They don't even take control over any key functions, even if temporarily. They simply provide the system with information to reorganize itself. And in this sense, when you think about what is health or an overall state of well-being, it is actually defined as resilience, which is really an organism's ability to respond to emerging challenges rather than a specific state of equilibrium. Now, I believe that these kinds of principles can actually provide us with a very rich source of references for also operating within the social realm. And I call this social acupuncture. And when you think about it, social ecologies and the networks they support are also shaped by flows and exchanges. The manner in which money, information, behavior, skills, ideas flow through a certain network will ultimately determine its overall well-being. When we recognize really successful ecologies, that could be a peaceful community, a successful education system, or just a great city vibe, what we actually recognize is a certain pattern. It's a kind of just right Goldilocks mix of structures and flows. And while these cannot be engineered, they can be actively promoted. So how does it work? Well, in a nutshell, social acupuncture methods analyze existing flows across a certain ecology. They then design actions that through small, accumulative interventions, usually away from the core, aim to strengthen or disrupt them. The idea behind this is that over time, the dominant formations, the ones you're really trying to shift, will be gradually undermined and subverted, and the system will gain the needed momentum to tip into a new ecological state. The system is not restructured, but is simply nudged to evolve. Now, I know that all this sounds really abstract, but during my research this year, I've come across some brilliant social acupuncturists. For example, Joe, who is leading a foundation promoting environmental issues in Europe. Now, most European environmental policies are actually decided in Brussels. And what she noticed were the high barriers to entry into the decision-making networks there. So instead of focusing expensive resources just on traditional political lobbies, she helped a social enterprise that provides ethical offices set up their first base in Brussels. And suddenly, loads of small NGOs who previously couldn't interact with the bureaucratic network had a base to operate from. And a whole swarm of environmentalists was simply unleashed on the town. And this, of course, over time altered information, social, and political exchanges. And there's Al, a sports scientist who also helped prepare British Olympic teams and developed a whole new approach for training for excellence. Rather than adhering to the ever more micromanaged top-down training routines, he works with sports institutions to create spaces for coaches and athletes to experiment and uncover personal tacit knowledge. And by empowering both coaches and young athletes, this creates whole new adaptive learning flows. Now, what we find in such cases is an overall strategy that aims to enable rather than to create change. The idea is that small, smart, low-profile interventions actually provide other players in the system with the information and the opportunity to self-organize and alter their behavior, and this over time creates much wider and indirect systemic impacts. So when you think about systemic impacts, the most effective ones are almost silent transformations. They are so deeply embedded into the existing landscape that they are almost deemed as inevitable by both supporters and oppositions alike. In that sense, social acupuncture needles are inexpensive and in abundance. We simply need to change the way we analyze systems, the way we define our goals, and the way we design our actions to make best use of them. Thank you.